Well, as you know, the global south has become a very fashionable world now, but it has always existed on the development paradigm. And we have seen that they are mostly comprising of underdeveloped countries or the developing world. India, in its G20 summit, the first thing it did was to consult with the G20, with the global south countries, and they called for this Voice of Global South Summit. Thereafter, they understood from them what are their concerns, what are their requirements. It became very much important to understand that in one way because the Russia Ukraine war, for example, in which we are seeing the weaponization of financial instruments, weaponization of food, fertilizer, and fuel, that all these countries in the global south have been suffering tremendously. And therefore, their voice has been accentuated by India by understanding what are their real concerns are. And those concerns have then been plowed back into the G20 deliberations. Not only that, thereafter again, we did that another G20 summit just before we gave away our presidency to Brazil. And the good thing is that this year, the last 4 years, four developing countries are chairing the G20. It started off with Indonesia, then it comes to India, then it comes to Brazil, and then it goes to South Africa. Therefore, the focus on the needs of the global south have become far more focused today. Now, it is also going to play a greater part in the evolving transitional global order. Today, what we are witnessing is that there is the old order is decimated to a great extent, courtesy their own promoters like the United States and the West. China is trying to, along with Russia, trying to craft a new rule-based order, which they call it, with more focus on multilateral regimes. But at the same time, there is going to be a conflict in these. Hence, the India's quest for this voice of global south is extremely important. And that's why we had the third summit. Second one, we took stock of the situation. And the third summit, which was held just now, which continues to show that you are focused on this, whether it is a pandemic, whether it is wars, that interest of these countries is supreme. Now, whether these countries are part of the G77, of course, G77 is also comprised of most of these countries. So it is a diffused kind of an organization in which everybody, whether it is in Asia, Africa, Latin America, they are all going to be part of these who are facing the similar developmental challenges. And countries like active countries, I would say, it has become important for every country. Now, anybody which is a power, whether it is China, China is working very hard. You know their Africa summits and all that, and they're also talking about Global South Summit. India, Voice of Global South Summit. Russia in the BRICS, and there are so many countries they have invited this time. Italy, when it was doing G7, they were focusing on Africa and the global south. Americans are following a different policy. So every country is trying to work out because they know that this is the place where the actual growth eventually is going to come out. So we are going to find global south also becoming a competitive space in times to come. So whoever does it in a benign manner, whether it is India, whether it is China, whether it is United States for that matter, will be able to steer it. But I feel that today more and more countries, unlike the 1950s, 60s, more and more countries want to have their own voice heard. They want to have a strategic autonomy. And that is the paradigm that India has been propagating. And therefore, in the third pole that India will create, eventually, I hope so, which I call as Nations for Strategic Autonomy, would most likely have many of these countries as part of it.
So there are more than 125 countries in this bloc. It's a bare expansion of the G77. So is it only about the number, or also this figure signifies something? I mean, it's more powerful. The global south is more united.
No, if I wish it was more united, but unfortunately, very often what happens is the countries play politics among them. So some of the countries are more dependent on the other, on the largesse, on the assistance that comes with it, because there are no free lunches in this world. So you are going to. That's why I said you are going to see a competition for that strategic space of global south uh, going forward.
What is the economic prosperity? Do you think this blocking will somehow shift the economic destinies of each nation? Say, for example, which is less performing economies. It could be from South Africa, it could be from Latam nation, or it could be from Southeast Asia. Yeah.
Well, economic growth is the most desired objective of every country's foreign policy development. For that, they need to have partners and they need to have their own policies in place that are going to eventually target that particular growth. So every country is trying to do that. But if you are going to become a member, for example, what is Voice of Global South? Means vis-a-vis those big nations, big countries, which want to impose the rules, but they are not willing to take on the responsibility. So, as a voice of Global South, you are projecting the concerns and you are trying to negotiate. For example, in WTO, in the agriculture sector, India took up the cause for this. Whether it was pandemic, when we went ahead and asked that there should be a waiver of the intellectual property rights for the vaccines, that's when you are talking about this important thing. When we are saying there should be green finance made available, green technology should be available for sustainability to go. When we are focusing on the SDGs, that the priority to the SDGs must be given as it is wanted, then obviously we are looking for this. So this is the role that powers like India, which are benign powers, which are acknowledged as benign partners, good partners, can play a role. That does not mean that we can defeat every others who are playing a venomous role. China, for example, has been following its debt policy. It might change, but it just had an Africa summit, FOCAC. And in that summit, they came up with new proposals. So countries will change their strategies in order to woo many of them who are there. So we'll have to see eventually how it works out. Everything is in a flux at the moment.
See. So the elite blocks, say for example G7 or even it could be G20, these are very integrated, even though they're not the regional, they don't share the landmass. So they're very integrated, they're very connected. Do you think the global south has a I mean big challenge because of it's the regions and the spread across the geographies? Do you think that's the territorial is not a blessing for them?
No, it's not that. It's the what we are looking at is as the global south is basically their developmental scale. They're essentially underdeveloped. They've been exploited. They have been colonized. They are facing neo-colonialism. They are facing vaccine apartheid. They are facing green apartheid. Now, those are the countries, irrespective of where they are located. So, having we have SARC, where there is a contiguity, but it's not worked. So that's not necessary that the contiguity could work. Like G7, you said, is mainly Western countries. But G7, now today you have BRICS, which is matching and going way beyond the G7's economic heft. So geo-economic competition will continue to emerge in times to come.